what we're hearing you talk about is a coping mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
It's just as strong as a coping mechanism as drugs or alcohol to numb. It's a way of surviving. Your coping skill that you did so well and really did at the time serve you was this, everything's good all the time and keep up the front, not even realizing it was a front.
Mm-mm.
It was so well done that coping mechanism really did serve you for many, many, many years until you were faced with a higher call and a bigger ask. Welcome back to the Mind Change Podcast. I'm Heather McKean, and today my co-host is Kent McKean, my husband and my partner now in the Mind Change business. And today we're going to be talking about, why do I need this if I have the perfect life?
That's a great question.
All right, welcome.
Thanks.
And so today I'm talking again with Kent McKean, my husband, and my now partner in Mind Change. But it wasn't always that way, was it?
No, it wasn't. Goodness, this was really your search for health originally, right? So all this mind-body connection stuff was just you trying to get well from being sicker and sicker.
So I think that's a good place to start. So I've shared my story about what it was like and some of the details. So just a short little, what was it like for you watching me go through all that, be sick? What was that experience like for you? And if you want to add commentary to what it was like.
That's a great question, actually. And I honestly don't know if my answer is going to be what it would have been 5 years ago or even 10 years ago when all this stuff was going on.
I wouldn't expect it to be.
But I think I've changed a lot of it and my representations of it. So when I think back to what it was like with you being so sick, I think there was definitely times of fear in me and scared for you, what's going to happen. But there was also this part of me that felt like I've got things under control, that I can handle these things. And something we may talk about now or not, but it's just this idea of me having this upper hand and then feeling acceptable, good enough, whatever, to be able to take care of you, take care of the kids. We had little kids at that time. And so I think a big portion of probably what was going on the surface when you were really sick is I hated it and it was hard and I just wanted to take care of you and I just wanted you to feel well. On the deeper layer, I think I was starting to feel an even greater sense of worth within myself, being someone who wanted to help the world in different ways, in different capacities, whether that's helping kids that I've done in the past or helping adults or whatever, but just this idea of helping. And I think I got a lot of my worth from being the strong one in our relationship, especially during that time.
Ooh, getting into some psychology and subconscious stuff here, but which we'll dive into that. So then I got well. So, it's a long, it's so much more
and you can
could
listen
go
to that
into
episode.
And whatever. Yeah, but then I got well. First of all, it was a crazy time and we had tried so many things and spent so much money on trying a myriad of different things, plus insurance, plus all of that stuff. And I had been on disability for a couple years by that point, right?
Yeah, like full disability, at least 2 years by that time.
Yeah, so wasn't working, was just a lot. So you were holding down the fort with the kids, holding down the fort with the job, doing a lot of different stuff.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, so I found this other thing. I'm going to go get well.
Yeah. It was definitely a process, right? Like it wasn't like all of a sudden but it was a process of learning, I think, for both of us. I think that we both were very willing to try whatever, right? We went all over the place, all over the map, all over the internet, trying to figure out something. And as soon as you started getting into this mind-body connection and your past and trauma and all these other things, and you really started to heal, I will say, I think it was a little bit of a shock, like when you actually were starting to get well. Like it was a quick shift. Now the process of getting well, or up to the point of starting to really get well, was a
or
long
my body
process.
showing
Sure,
the
but I mean,
wellness.
even the years and years of the process of finding healing through mind-body connection, that was a process. But then once you started getting into it and the neuroscience of it, and obviously the neurochemical, everything changing for you, it was very fast actually. And for me, I think that was startling. I don't know what other word to use. It's not like I was upset, like, oh, why are you well? Or what? I mean, obviously I was very happy, but it was, it was startling. That's the best word I can come up with I was like, okay, now what? I mean, it's everything would have to shift, right? Because we had been living our life. We had been doing family and raising children and
having
a
marriage.
marriage and our career, and everything was really based around your health or lack thereof in a lot of ways. And figuring out like what we can and can't do, and just how we interact with one another. And so all of a sudden you're different, which changes everything, right?
Everything. Yeah. And different, not just, okay, well, I was sick and now I'm not sick.
Sure.
Different in that I'm thinking differently and speaking differently and reacting differently. It's like I was a completely different person in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, that part right there, that I think was scary for me. So I was scared for you before. Like, I didn't want you to die. I didn't want you to. And then all of a sudden you're getting well physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, on all levels, right? And you're elevating and you're evolving and you're changing and you're growing. And all of a sudden I'm still that scared boy, because I don't think I knew how to handle that. We had lived what? By that time, 12 years, 10 years of marriage or something like that, in one way, 8 years, 9 years, whatever it was. And now all of a sudden things have to shift, and I wasn't prepared.
And this is something we know now that we didn't know then. We know so much more about this now, and we look for these patterns now in the people we work with and still in our lives.
Sure.
But how much our romantic relationships, or even any relationships really, are a recreation of something within
Sure.
our childhood. We didn't know that. In fact, I really thought in marrying you, being so different than people that I had grown up with.
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know sort of the story, Kent grew up in a very religious upbringing, and I'll let you speak a little bit more about that. Good family, like solid family, good
together.
family,
Yeah.
like parents are together, very what maybe all of us sort of idealize as the typical American family with all these values and everything. I grew up not like that at all. Not like that at all. And not to vilify or say anything negative there. I have a lot of great things that I can access now about the way that I grew up. A lot. But was atypical to that addiction and abuse and neglect. And
Well, you were trying to run away from that part of your family.
Sure.
And build a different family. I was trying to, on the other hand, like mirror everything in my family, thinking and feeling like this is exactly, again, this whole idea of this is the perfect life. So I need to replicate it. And you were like, I got to get away from the past. But the problem is when we came together, we realized we were actually running through our, we were doing our subconscious programs. We were finding exactly the same thing that we were in one sense trying to not have.
Well, I think and we probably don't have the time to get into all of that right now, how some of the driving motivating factors for why we did what we did and who we believed that we were at the time were a lot more in alignment with our familial structures than we would have realized.
For sure.
And so our coming together was really more what I would say we kind of trauma bonded without, not the typical way. I don't really speak about trauma bonding the way that it's spoken about in a lot of circles. But I really think what brought us together was some things that weren't resolved in our lives, in our family. And we thought that we'd be able to do that with each other totally subconsciously. Would you?
Well, yeah, and I'm super idealistic, especially back then. So,
right. So here I come into his life, and it's funny that we put this piece together. I'd say maybe about 4 years into my journey after I had gotten well and Kent started doing the work, which we'll get into in a second, where he remembered a conversation he had with his mother.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Which is so telltale. These are just not the things you think of. So much of how we are just wired subconsciously and how it just ends up being what drives us. So do you want to share about that?
Let me start by saying one of the things that drove me to Heather was the fact that you are, in my mind, especially back then, you're like this wild thing, you know, you're like this passionate, like I'm going off, I'm living on a ranch, I'm riding horses, I'm wrangling, I'm doing what like just this wildness about you. Even like our circle of friends, like you were probably considered more of the wild ones. And, you know, just, I don't know. I actually loved that about you. And again, there's a lot of subconscious drivers behind that of like me
I want
being,
to be the wild one.
Yes. So
I don't want to just marry her. I want to be her. And then me looking for stability, structure, someone who's a good person,
Right.
you know, who's like reliable and colors inside the lines.
that was me.
Yeah,
I mean,
that
for the
was
most
you.
part, you know. But anyways, so, you know, I have this vision of you, this love for that piece of you, right? And
But it also scared the crap out of
well,
you.
yeah, absolutely. Because I didn't necessarily know what I was in for, but it is what it is what I wanted, right? And so this idea of healing, getting back to that. Oh, my mom, the conversation with my mom, I forgot about that. So, okay, this whole conversation with my mom is I basically was like, oh, this is who she is, and I love this and all of that. And then
Talking to your mom about after you had met me.
yeah, after I
Yeah.
met you, and ultimately after I was like, I think she's the one. Like,
Which would happened in like a week, right? Like 2 weeks maybe.
probably less than that. So, anyways, I was talking to her and we were talking about a lot of different things, but I also knew a little bit just about some of your health issues, right? And it wasn't even health stuff so much as some food stuff and, you know, things like that. Autoimmune, some
Yeah, I
autoimmune.
had some autoimmune.
But it wasn't anything like 2012. I mean, it was nothing like that.
No, because I had learned how to do very well with these. I had been doing chronic illness for so long. It was just part of my day to day.
Sure.
So it's not like it was something that at that point I was like, this is debilitating. It's just something I learned to live with.
Exactly. And so I noticed that there was some stuff there, but man, you were strong, you were feisty, you know, all these different things. So I mentioned some of this stuff to my mom and she's like, so there's some health stuff. She like picks that out. and we talk about that for a minute. And she's like, well, okay, so I just want to ask you, I don't know if she said I want to give you advice or I want to, you know, but it was more like, so are you sure that you want to get into something this deep and this big with someone who has chronic health issues? Because, you know, that's actually, and she kind of goes on to talk about what that's like and what I guess people in, you know, she's dealt with or whatever. And I was like, no, you know, I think it's exactly what I want because I've always wanted to be able to marry someone that I could really take care of. That was my answer in this, like, you know, I'm this knight and I'm going to like swoop you off your feet and rescue you from whatever.
But only if she's disabled.
Right. Well, and not that I knew that, but yeah.
Right. I've got to be able to.
So if we're jumping, I mean, we're going to jump back and forth, but if we're jumping to Heather getting well and you got well, all of a sudden you don't need that person to carry you to the bathroom anymore. You don't need that person to take care of everything in life. You don't need that person to make sure that, you know, the meals on the table or the kids are taken care of because, right?
Would be the primary breadwinner.
Exactly.
Or, yeah.
You didn't need that anymore.
Somebody lost his job.
Mm.
AKA worth and value and purpose in life. But we didn't know that.
No, because I really, again, getting back to this idea of the perfect life, I did grow up in a really stable family atmosphere, environment. Like, even though we moved around a bunch and we did a lot of different things, it was always some sort of inspiration, adventure, something going on. And when there was issues or problems, I felt like I was shielded from a lot of that. You know, whatever. It was a decent, good, normal family upbringing. I don't know what normal is anymore, but
right. What we would have, the ideal.
What I considered was the only way.
Yes. And there was a culture in your family and in your upbringing and surroundings that being a good family, a put together family, was part of the value.
The value really came down to doing what's right. In other words, behaving a certain way, and living a life that people on the outside see as good. Not necessarily this, like, you have to be a lawyer or a doctor. I mean, that is my family lineage, but not so much that, but more just put together, happy. You know, just things
grateful,
are good.
Happy, grateful, smiling, good.
And I did produce that life, actually.
Sure.
So growing up, even when there were issues or problems, like, I always defaulted and went back to, you know what, things are okay, I'm okay, and subconsciously stuffing a lot of things and kind of whatever. But I lived that life. And then I met you, and I was that quote unquote stable person.
But how interesting that once we met and we got together and then we got married, my health further deteriorated as time went on.
Well, and my thinking of feeling strong and confident and knowing what I want all of a sudden was like breaking apart.
Right. Well, yeah. And obviously subconsciously we're speaking to one another and we're communicating non-verbally. And I had a belief that I didn't know existed at the time, excuse me, that you were the good one. Mm-hmm. I was the bad one. You were the good one. And so I needed to constantly default to what you think, like, you're going to keep me good. And so when that started happening, when we got married and you started to you didn't have a job at the time because you were an actor and it was in LA and it was a whole time of guild strikes.
Well, I just gotten out of college.
Right. There was a lot of stuff happening. And then, and I was the one working at the time. And there was this shift that was happening of your identity. You were away from people you knew. You were around nobody that you knew from the East Coast to now living in California. And there started to be a bit of a shift in you weren't working, like you weren't getting work, which you usually were able to get work before. Yeah. So that started to erode at some of your known value, some of your known worth, the way that you determined worth.
Sure. Worth for me I think had a lot to do with achieving and receiving and being valued by others.
Yeah. So then you started to spiral a little bit.
I did.
Yeah. Like, I would have called at the time what I knew. I was like, dude, you're depressed. And you were, no, I'm not depressed.
Right. Because a stable person and someone in my family, we don't do depression. That's not what, And so I just kind of, no, I'm fine. I'm good. And kind of buckled down and kept going and really trying to search for, like, who am I?
Getting more and more like sucked on,
but feeling like
me.
I should already know, right? And yes, I did actually that's a weird, sucked onto you. I sucked onto you. I was like a leech. But with this, I mean, you were all into horses. And so, and I had a background a little bit with like toying around with horses. I enjoyed it, but I wasn't a horse person. I didn't grow up with horses. But then I became a farrier, right? A horseshoer. And, it was like, oh, I'll do that. And it was a little bit, again, following and looking to you for approval. That's a big one for me is I felt like I did have people around me that supported me and that were in one sense verbally like approving of what I did all the time for the first 20 whatever years. And then I get into a situation where I'm not around my friends, I'm not around the same, church people, I'm not around the same environment, I'm not around this whatever.
Your family as
and,
much, yeah.
And I'm around you and as incredible and amazing, that's not the kind of like verbiage and that wasn't your environment of like, let's always support each other. Let's always make sure fluff each other up. Like that wasn't your thing. You're like, what, And so for me, I recognize
verbal affirmation is not my strongest character trait.
Sure. But
it can be.
You're great
when I admire something.
When Heather speaks encouragement or affirmation, for anybody who hears it, know that you are extra valued because it's only going to come out of her mouth if it is absolutely authentic.
Yes, that's actually true.
Yeah.
I do not do what I call fluff.
Yeah.
But
anyways, that did a lot to my worth as well. Because
you're like, please fluff me, fluff me. Even if it's fake, I need some fluff. I just didn't know. We didn't know. I had zero, zilch emotional intelligence. I just really didn't.
Well, okay. So back to this whole idea of me kind of spiraling down, and us kind of figuring out back and forth who each other are and this relationship and whatever else. You started getting
okay. So then this triggers in me attachment and regulation issues from childhood, which I didn't know I had then, which was put myself at the way to love is to lay down my life forward, to put myself below and focus on the other person. That's what I did with my mother growing up when there was very active addiction. I was super enabling and codependent with her. And that to me gave me worth and value and purpose as a child. So when I watched you spiral, it just kicked in these gears. But for me, what that was doing was triggering all that stuff to start coming up in my body.
Sure.
My body speaking up. And I got sicker and more, and just had more and more physical stuff coming up, which, look at how we did it. Good job, us. Allowed you to feel like, oh, I have more. Okay, see, I can have more value. I can serve a purpose. I can take care of her.
Can I speak to that for just a second? So this idea of, I think for me, being chosen for things, like I choose you, it gives you value, that kind of thing. I mean, even the whole thing of me on a subconscious level being an actor and having to be chosen, right? It's this whole idea of rejection or chosen. And so when I met you, it's this whole thing of like, okay, I found you, I choose you, choose me too, right? I really wanted you to continuously choose me. And then when, I was kind of spiraling and doing different things, and you started spiraling on a physical level, again, it was you had to default to choosing me to take care of you.
Right.
Which then actually kind of boosted everything inside of me. Like you said, I had this whole revamp of like, oh, I have another purpose. Like this is who I am. This is what I do. And so my purpose, my worth had a lot to do with being chosen or being needed.
And all of our maladaptions worked well together, which is how we found each other, I think, which was me, okay, well, I'll give up. Like I gave up my career, things that I felt like I had really built. I was managing a horse farm in the hills of Malibu. In a lot of ways had achieved these sort of dreams of mine.
Yeah.
But when that started to, and my issues with my back, which I've spoken to before, just escalated so badly there when you were when I started to see you kind of floundering a little bit. Now, again, we didn't know it at the time. I would have never made those connections. But my back, remember, kept going out. I'm not talking about your back goes out like, oh, bummer.
No, like
I
ER.
mean,
Like we had to take you to the ER. They shot you full of drugs and it still did nothing.
did nothing. Yeah, we've given you enough drugs to knock out a rhino and you're still screaming. Yeah, those were my pain stories at the time. So there was that escalation. Until then, a job opportunity was offered that was really your dream, had been your dream for a long, long time. And I was like, oh, that's something I could do too. Yeah, let's do that together. And that sort of took us to that next level. We moved states, we moved careers, we, got into all of those things. And not long after that, a year, I guess, after that, we started to, I'm older. We got married while I was a little bit older. And we realized where I was in my age, we needed to start a family. We wanted to start a family. And that began.
Well, that's the perfect life. You get married right after college.
Get married young.
Get married young. And then you're together for a few years. And then you have your children. You have your 2 kids. That's exactly perfect, right?
We were on your timeline. Yeah. And that's when my journey with infertility had started.
Right.
And lots of stuff around the infertility. And not that I hadn't had stuff before. I mean, I had been diagnosed with endometriosis in 2000 and had multiple surgeries there.
Yep.
So lots of stuff there. But then that took us into a whole other direction. I finally did get pregnant. That's a whole other story. Everything's a story, and it's quite a story. But my body kept trying to, after some miscarriages, my body kept trying to chemically abort, and I was on medications and injections, which you had to administer.
Yeah.
And I was on bed rest.
And I had to be the one to be like, okay, you stay here. I'm going to go out. Again,
Yep.
It was that whole thing of that program of, I've got this. You need me to tell you this. You need me to provide this. You need me.
And my body did what it needed to do. It provided it did the system.
Yeah.
And made it, what we needed at the time, which we didn't know that we needed. So that's
Needed, but wasn't actually fulfilling, right? I mean,
Right,
I kept
sure.
getting my worth from doing things for you or being needed or being chosen, but I actually still deep down felt that worthlessness.
When I say needed, I'm meaning to stay in alignment
Yeah.
with our programming at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I get pregnant, have the first child, another story. And really after that is when my health really started to just take a downward spiral. So fast forwarding until, which now I know is because an evolutionary component of our body is we do not want to pass down unhealed trauma to our children. There's kickback from every level, and we just live in such a modern world. We can override it if we want to. And I did. I overrided every message of my body simply because I didn't know that that's what was happening
Right.
at the time. And we then ended up with 2 children, thank the Lord. But that's where everything just started to go. So then fast forward to, I get well in a relatively short amount of time. And now you've lost your main job, the one that you've really been relying on the majority of our marriage to define your worth and your value and your role in our
Right.
marriage. And now I can do it all by myself.
Yeah, that was the scary part, right? And kind of going back to even our first year of marriage, some of Heather's languaging and certain things like saying, oh, I just can't, so I, again, with this perfect life idea was like, well, no, we don't fight. Like, I never saw my parents fight. And like married couples, good married couples don't fight, and we don't raise our voice at each other. Everything's just
We don't
good.
disagree. We don't.
Everything's just right. Anyways, so
I was like, what? Who are you? I disagree with that.
Towards the beginning of our marriage, there would be some things that would happen or things that I would do or say or whatever. And then, Heather would get to a place of like, oh, I can't do this anymore. Now, again, the way I took that was like, she's going to leave me. What's going to happen? Whatever it is.
This was him. I can't do you anymore. And it was what I was saying. And again, I wouldn't have known it at the time to be able to articulate this. Otherwise,
Sure.
I could have. It's not this marriage I don't want to do anymore. It's this behavior. Like I cannot continue in this behavior, the way it makes me feel, the way that I'm reacting to it. That's what I was speaking to, but that is not what was heard.
Yeah, not what was heard at all. And so very scary back then of like, oh no, I need her to stay with me. Don't leave me, this abandonment issue. Anyways, so then coming back to, we have kids, you're starting to get well a number of years later, 2012, 13. And wow, all of a sudden, not only does she not need me to cook, clean, take care of the bills, all these other things, but now she can do anything. And again, it's that whole idea of, oh no, what does that mean for our relationship? What does that mean about me? What does that mean about, wait, am I not good? Does she not need me anymore? And am I not good enough anymore for her? So there was a lot of fears that came up in me.
And I think something that I don't even know that we've ever actually spoken this out loud, which would be surprising considering as much as we talk about this kind of stuff. But I think what was going on with my healing journey too was I was leveling up in every aspect and area of my life. And I think energetically, though I wouldn't have had the languaging for it at the time, I was now like, no, I don't need you. I want you.
Which is actually even scarier for me, back then, especially.
Because the high call was intimacy.
Right.
The high call was authenticity.
But I was just really good at playing the game of just being good and really genuinely being good. Like I wanted to be. I wasn't faking it. Like I really did want it, but there was this authenticity and this intimacy part that was just so incredibly scary because when you look down inside someone, it's not always good and pretty and perfect, right?
Well, that was your fear. That's the fear, is that, ooh, if she really sees me, she's not going to like what she sees, which is really just a reflection of you looking deep and saying, maybe I don't like what I see down there.
Right.
And if I can just now.
But I never would have even known that or even swallowed that back then.
No way. I mean, guys, this is just evolution of us in our journey. And I would say that is such a point I want to speak to, that what we're hearing you talk about is a coping mechanism. Mm-hmm. It's just as strong as a coping mechanism as drugs or alcohol to numb. It's a way of surviving, right? I do this. A lot of them do it to numb because it feels against survival to be faced with feeling all that they feel about maybe what's happened or their past. So for you as well, your coping skill that you did so well and really did at the time serve you was this, everything's good all the time and keep up the front, not even realizing it was a front. Mm-mm. It was so well done that coping mechanism really did serve you for many, many, many years until you were faced with a higher call and a bigger ask of, I don't want that anymore. And I don't need to be rescued anymore. Now what do you got?
Right.
And when you looked deep, you're like, I don't know if I've got anything, right? I'm not sure you're going to like what I've got. Again, subconscious, which is the key of what we talk about so much, right? All of this happening subconsciously.
So if we're going back to that time when you did get well or started to really get well, it was really threatening for me, but I didn't recognize that at the time. Like I wouldn't have been able to say, hey, I'm feeling really threatened, or I'm feeling really, I feel like this is threatening my worth. Like,
right? No, we did not have that language.
Not only did we not have the language, there's no way I would have been able to see that or face that or, so anyways, getting back to that, I didn't know what to do. And of course, me doing good all of my life, I was more of a freezer, right? And so I didn't necessarily run away from problems. Like I always was around. I didn't, and I definitely did not fight. I was not a fighter by any means because anger bad, but I just kind of froze. And so I'd say a good 6 months to a year, it was just this like, okay, I'm so glad you're getting well. And I was really happy that you were getting well and thriving and doing, but it was almost like all of a sudden I was living with a stranger and I didn't know how to interact with you.
Right. So any of you who are polyvagal informed, and even if you're not, what was happening in him was really going down, moving down into like that freeze and fawn kind of place where he really did seem a little bit paralyzed and lost. Mm-hmm. So someone who was functioning at seemingly such a high level, taking care of so many things.
And like a hard worker, like
Such a hard
continuously
worker.
taking on more projects at work, more things that weren't asked of me, like, hey, let's make this better. Let's make this bigger.
Yeah. And like covering so many bases.
But
Now I'm well and I'm like, hey, let's do this life. And he just freezes, shuts down, just like, and I started to see it after a while, like, what is your deal? What's going on with you? Like massive spiral.
Well, and it started even in our working relationship way back then. It started with just me kind of opposing everything that if it was a great idea, or, well, I don't know about this, or because again, on a subconscious level, everything good was threatening who I was.
Right.
And so, yeah, so there was a whole, about a year of just freezing and not knowing. And I mean, it was time for me to reflect and all that. But as Heather continued to get well and even implement these things in herself, with our children, the way she speaks, and then the way she interacted with me, I was really happy for her, but I was really, there was a part of me that was like, ooh, I have little issues and things in my life. I want to change this too. But when we'd actually get in there, it was like...
That was later.
It was like a titanium wall.
Dude, that was later. That you didn't even go there in the beginning.
Yeah, it took over
No,
a
because
year.
we had to break through that, like, but I'm the good one. I have the perfect life. Like, I know I'm the one that's been doing all of this stuff. And when all of that identity was unraveling, there wasn't anything else to go toward. So it was really just an unraveling. And I'm sitting there going, wait, where's this? Like, we're supposed to go do all the things that we were being held back by.
Right, all the things that we
unquote.
wanted to do, now we can.
Right. And
I just
where
put the
did
brakes
you
on
go?
everything.
Like,
Right.
he just was checked out. You were so checked out. So that brought a ton of conflict. Tons of conflict. Again, that we didn't really have the languaging for. And as someone who doesn't fight, who really just freezes more or fawns
even the
more.
fight part, I didn't even express anything that would be, in my mind, considered detrimental or possibly hurtful or possibly opposing or possibly anything towards you, because ultimately that's not what I wanted for me, because I was too afraid of that kind of a thing. But anything, I just wouldn't, we'd get with even couples who are like helping us in our marriage or different things. How are things going? Yeah, no, things are good. Like, is there anything that, you want Heather to change, or is there anything that you feel like could be, I don't know. Like, I would have such a hard time. I would freeze. That's the whole thing. I would freeze.
Completely freeze. Which then, of course, I'm like hungry for evolution and leveling up. Now I got a taste of this whole like, oh, wait, things can be different, and realizing, like, starting to understand that I had inherent worth rather than worth built from all these things I either would do or be, or everything like that. And then I'm trying to engage with my partner, and you are just shutting down.
And anything that you would say that was like, hey, how can we change, or anything about me that would need to change internally, I would take that as, oh, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And that's why I have to change. And so I think that's even what delayed me of wanting to go on into this deeper work, because having to change something from my past meant something wasn't good in my past. No, it was. Everything was great.
Right.
Or changing something in my present meant there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And so that was a massive threat. And so that's why I think froze so much, right? I just wasn't willing to face that there's something wrong with me. Now, here's the key. Of course, you and I both would never say that there's anything wrong with anyone, even when there's issues and problems and behaviors and all, because actually we're working exactly the way that we're wired to work.
Right.
Neurologically, like that is exactly. But for me, on my level where I was at the time, 2014 or whatever, it was 13, 14, it was just too much. It meant there's something wrong. And I had to keep this belief that everything's perfect, like everything's good.
Woo.
Which made it worse.
Okay, so I think what I'd like to get into, which I think we'll have to do for the next episode, is how then did you finally like, okay, I actually need this? Because the attitude was, well, that worked for you and that's fine for you.
You needed it.
You needed it, but I'm okay.
Yeah, well, there was so much judgment in our relationship from the beginning, right? And this whole thing of, you're the bad one. I didn't actually say that, but I definitely sent those vibrations your way of like, hey, I know how to live a good life. So, hey, follow me, kind of an idea. And then throughout our marriage, this is how we do marriage. And then, of course, when you level up and change and all these things, that threatened that whole thing. And so I had to be more judgmental. I had to, so yeah, it was good for you. And you needed it. Was so yeah, she just needed all of this. She needed this work. She needed to get well. She needed to think differently. I'm so glad. But not me.
Well, and then we have all of these people like, oh my gosh, aren't you so happy? You must be so, like all this feedback about how miraculous it is that I'm well. Mm-hmm. And all these people like flooding you with all these comments, and how disconcerting that is for you to be like, yeah, and feeling like how incongruent, because on the inside, it doesn't feel good, actually. You're feeling worse than ever, more lost than ever on the inside. But yet, you're supposed to be happy and feeling good. And yeah, it's wonderful that she's well. But like, wow, what an incongruency what a number that must have done on you. And do you remember how much of a number it did on you?
I don't know if I remember as much anymore. I've done so much work around that.
Do you remember that is the point where you got diagnosed with Lyme disease? Sexually transmitted Lyme disease.
I totally forgot that I started leeching off of all of your health issues before you got well.
Well, and then you started doing the so the doctor had said that I had admitted it to him because I had chronic Lyme, whatever. And boy, you started doing, and do you remember that you were like blacking out while driving? Like your vision?
Oh, wow. I don't actually remember that fully, but that rings a bell.
Do you remember your vision would tunnel so much and you'd just have a little tiny spot where you could see?
Oh my goodness. And we both know what that means on an emotional driver representational
level.
We know what that is now.
Yeah, but
I have not thought about that since I don't know.
Since we had no idea what was really happening
yeah.
with it.
Oh
right.
my
Yeah.
goodness.
So many things. Even your body started really speaking out when, which it does.
Well, and even when you were in the throes of everything, I remember there were times that we were asked to speak at different things, whatever. And I finally got to a place where I was able to reveal some emotion. Like I was I am emotional, but I learned to kind of temper it. So I was never super excited and never super low. It was just, here, and that's good. And that's, whatever. And I got to a place of actually emoting a little bit more with how I'm actually feeling with the fact that you're so sick. Right. And so I started getting there a little bit, and then we're getting accolades, and we're getting I'm getting some worth from feeling these things about your negative health issues and whatever. And so then you're getting well, and now it's all this stuff of oh, she's well, isn't this awesome? And again, it ties back to, but what about my worth?
So layers upon layers of
and I'll tell you what,
stuff.
It took so long. I'm still, always finding more layers to break through.
Right. This actually might uncover some as we sit here and talk.
Thank you. More to work on.
Let's do this, because I think it's really valuable. And I love that we're able to have come so far to where we can actually speak to this at such a vulnerable level. So I do think we should talk about it more. I know we don't have the time right now. So let's episode 2 this.
I get a part 2.
You get a part 2. You know you're going to be co-hosting numerous times.
know.
But so for all of you who don't know, he's actually the behind the scenes camera person. So making the sound and the cameras look great and all this stuff, he's so gifted at that. But he's also incredibly gifted at this work now. And I would love for everyone to hear how that happened, because it's cool and it's a big story.
All right.
So I'll invite you back again.
Thanks.
All right. So check out the next episode to hear the end of this story. Or is it the beginning? And thanks for joining us. So subscribe, do all the stuff that I suppose people do. And we look forward to having you with us next time.
Yeah, Heather, this episode was perfect.